Good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending our latest free webinar, always with the aim of helping financial advisors and planners market their business more successfully, more effectively. And today, I'm delighted that we're joined by Dominic Hiatt, a PR expert. He doesn't like the word guru, as if anybody who's watched one of his LinkedIn videos will find out. So we'll go with expert rather than guru. And Dom's going to help us today talk about the world of journalism, press, PR, and how we can help financial advisors and planners get more press coverage. Now, I've known Dom for over 10 years. He's helped me and the businesses that I've worked for and run get some great publicity in the personal finance page of the national press and elsewhere. So there was no one better to get on today's webinar when we want to talk about this topic. We're going to do it as a Q&A. We're not going to do a presentation. We're going to do it as a Q&A. And so I'm going to get Dan just to explain a bit more about how it will work.
Sure thing. So a few key housekeeping points. So I'm Dan, and my job is to make sure everything's running smoothly. So if it's not running smoothly, it means I've done something wrong. So please let me know in the comments if the sound goes off or if Phil catches fire or something. We're accepting questions from the audience, so either ask them in the chat function or there's a little Q&A box at the bottom there. I'll be monitoring both, so they'll get swept up. So I'll be reading them out at regular intervals, but we will have a period at the end where we'll sweep any final ones up. So don't worry, we will get to them. A recording will be sent out afterwards, so you can rewatch it at your leisure. And finally, so a question we often get asked on these webinars is whether we can see or hear you. Most people are working from home. We've got kids, pets, noisy things in the background. Don't worry, we absolutely can't. Which brings up a good point, actually. So PR and journalists are always a bit of an emotive topic. So please accept our apologies in advance. If the language gets a little bit spicy, I predict it may well do. But yeah, so these sessions work well with plenty of questions, so don't be afraid to get stuck in. Right, over to you, Phil and Dom.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to take the screen share off. We don't look at that slide all the time. So hopefully everybody can see each other now.
I've got my sausage dog has got masking tape around its nose at the moment. So yeah.
Well, my daughter's in the other room, so she might end up having that. Right, so Dom, let's start with just a bit of background about you, if that's okay. Just tell us your history and what you're doing right now and how you led up to that.
Well, I don't think you actually know this, Phil, but I started life after leaving university with an arts degree, not knowing what the hell to do. I ended up getting a job as an IFA, working for the dodgiest firm ever in the late 90s in London. I won't name them, but it was like Blazing Saddles meets financial advice. I mean, I've never known as many cowboys. And we were even encouraged to sort of check our clients' coats for checkbooks. This is the day when checkbooks, I mean, it was proper, it was like 1980s America. I mean, it was like Wall Street. It was just crazy. But I left after about 2 months, but because it was just, they were trying to get you to flog your mum and MIP, you know, just sell your family first, you know, sell your sister anything she doesn't need and blah, blah, blah. So I left. It was an awful experience, but I did out of that get FBC 1 and 2 because it was commission only, and they gave you, if they paid for your FBC 1 and 2, and I don't know what, it's probably all changed now, but so at least I left there and I thought, what the hell am I good at? You know, I mean, you know, I'm no good at that sort of that thing at all, but I thought I'm good at drinking and I'm good at writing, and sort of that for me, journalism just became like an obvious place to start. And roughly at the same time, a job came up, I don't know where, but I saw a job in money management as a sort of trainee journalist at, now money management used to be the sort of Bible apparently for sort of financial advisors. Back in the 90s and early noughties, it's obviously been sort of, you know, subsumed into FT Advisor now and whatever. So that's where I started off under Janet Walford, who was a bit of a legendary editor. And she taught me a lot, and I worked there for about 3 years and, you know, actually dealt a hell of a lot with IFAs. I mean, we were, you know, writing gigantic features on with-profit endowments and, you know, all kinds of stuff. So, you know, oversaw the transition from PEPs to ISAs, that I think that happened in about 98 or 99. So it was an interesting time. But anyway, so I sort of, started as an IFA, failed miserably, started as a journalist, worked at money management for a few years, worked at the Investors Chronicle. Then I started freelancing for nationals, national newspapers. And then I essentially, started to have kids and thought, Jesus, I need to earn some proper money, as you do. So I went to the dark side and sold my soul and sort of ended up running a PR agency. And here we are. So, and by the way, I've never considered myself a PR. I can't stand the PR world. It's a vile place. It's just just don't consider myself a PR. All of our company are sort of ex-journalists, and we pride ourselves on that. So yeah.
Excellent.
Is that enough?
Absolutely, that's fine. I'll try and remember not to refer this to as PR for the next hour.
No, exactly that.
Otherwise,
I think journalists tend to make the best PRs because they understand what constitutes a story, whereas a lot of PRs have never worked in PR. Therefore, I think unless you've been a journalist and you know what journalists want and how they operate, it's actually hard to, to meet what they want.
Okay, so with all that as context, for you were talking to an advisor or planner. What are the key benefits of being featured in the press?
Well, financial services, clearly the main benefit of being quoted in a newspaper or online is the credibility that creates. I mean, it's instant credibility. If people are Googling you, people are, if, they're looking for an IFA, they're going to tap your name into Google and they're going to see what comes up. And if you come up on the BBC, talking about, ISAs or whatever it is, just giving your views, that you're instantly seen as credible. So I think credibility is the main reason why you do PR. Credibility and trust, basically. People immediately trust you if they see you being quoted, and regularly. If you're, in the Telegraph, the Mail, the Guardian, the Independent, if you're, and your local newspapers, if you're quoted regularly and you've got a great online web presence in decent media outlets, you've got a real, that's a real huge selling point. So I think credibility and trust, obviously awareness, because if you're on the BBC, your company's name gets in front of potentially millions of people. You can get traffic, you can get leads, PR, I always say, don't expect to get results. You don't expect to get new clients phoning you up if you appear in the FT or that there's a big sort of misconception that, PR suddenly results in clients immediately. It doesn't really work like that. It can. I had a mortgage broker who 2 weeks ago was in the Telegraph, and on the back of that, he got a £2 million loan, a mortgage. So, it does happen, but really it's credibility and trust. That's, that's the main thing. And then you could put these logos as featured in on your, which we'll come on to later, on your website, which again reinforces that trust with your clients and potential clients. So, and
I guess a sense that credibility and trust takes time to build up. You clearly don't get it just one article, job done. This is a long-term strategy for building credibility.
Exactly that, and which is why you get a lot of established, some of the bigger names. They plow a lot of money into PR because they know the value and the trust, and also it's when people, it also creates phenomenal SEO value. If your company is getting quoted regularly, you're going to pick up backlinks, which means that you become suddenly very findable online. So, yeah, it's an ongoing thing, and the more you're featured in the big media, especially, the more people trust you, and the more potential clients you'll get. So
if that's true, and I don't doubt it is, because I've seen the benefits of it myself. What are the key publications that, as an advisor or planner, if you were an advisor or planner, what are the key publications you'd want to be in?
Generally speaking, I think everyone looks at Sunday Times Money as like that's where they want to be. The FT Money, the money supplement, the personal finance supplement, the weekend papers, they're kind of seen as sort of, that's the holy grail for a lot of IFAs. Personally, I think, going for those, it's very high risk because you've got such intense competition. It can actually be better to go off piece, which we can come on to later, and go for news journalists. So, breaking news stories and get into the news sections of the newspapers. where there's less sort of competition. But yeah, I think for most IFAs, if they're appearing in the Sunday Times or the Times and, you know, these kinds of weekend papers, the broadsheets, that's where they want to be.
So if credibility and trust are the output, and we want to be in the personal finance and the broadsheets, with potential the news sections as well, how do you go about approaching journalists? How do you stand out? What are the best ways to approach them?
Well, I think the one thing journalists want, their main weakness is getting case studies. Case studies are so important. They can drive, you know, journalists have a nightmare finding case studies, because what will happen is they'll be writing a story and their editor will say, look, this is great, but can we just find a human example of someone who's done this? I don't know, who's maybe transferred from equities to bonds because they're worried about risk or whatever. But if you can provide journalists with case studies, that gets you into journalist good books instantly. It's like a massive, journalists are desperate for case studies all the time. So I know it's a real ball ache, because a lot of people, you know, you've got to reach out to your client base, but when you're speaking to your clients, you should say, look, are you prepared? You know, would you be prepared to sort of be featured in a national? And now they're not going to expect you to talk about sensitive numbers, but it's just, you know, somebody, you know, a picture of a couple, you know, with their dog. I mean, that Sunday Times love that kind of thing. So if you can get into the sort of routine of getting case studies out of your client base, people who will happily talk to journalists about, you know, their planning and also about you and the role that you play, that is a brilliant, you know, way to get on, you know, into a journalist's good books.
That's fascinating, because we've worked with probably 25 clients now, financial advisors, planners, and we've recorded their clients on video.
Exactly.
So if those clients are prepared to be on video on their financial advisor or planner's website, they're probably prepared to talk to their
100%. And that is gold dust, and people don't do it enough. And what you'll find is the really big, you know, the Hargreaves, Lansdowns, they are machines. They're like sausage factories. They just create case studies, and they will actively go to journalists and say, look, we have case studies of whatever you want, you know, we will find you a case study. And for journalists, that's just, you know, it's a huge bonus. So I really think, you know, talking to your clients, if they're happy to do a video, if they're happy to give you a testimonial on your website, you know, they're more probably going to be happy to be featured, you know, in the you know, the Daily Telegraph for you. So you know, give them a bottle of champagne to make, you know, to say thanks. I mean, a lot of people do that, and it's, you know, if you have a client saying good things about you in a national newspaper, that's about the best coverage you can get. There's nothing beats it. So
yeah, absolutely. I had one journalist tell me on Twitter a few weeks ago, ex-journalist, who will remain nameless, that journalists aren't interested in good news case studies. They're only interested in bad news case studies.
Well, I mean, journalists, you know, I mean, there's a saying, if it bleeds, it leads, you know, anything bad is, you know, if, you know, bad news is, you know, that's what journalists thrive on. But, you know, there is an element to that. But, you know, a lot of the stories are, you know, are constructive stories about planning for the future, you know, in the weekend papers, it's all, so they do want people, you know, who are planning and being responsible and sort of, you know, they want to drill into how these people are investing, you know, for a decent retirement. So, you know, that's not entirely true. You know, case studies, good positive case studies, and, you know, certain papers will say, well, we want them, you know, whatever, it could be a, you know, a married couple, they want certain types of case studies. But yeah, so no, that's not true. It's, you know, journalists do like, you know, I would 100% go to journalists and say, if you want case studies, come to me, and then don't let them down when they do, get them case studies, and you'll reap the benefits.
So just talk about a bit more about that for us. If you've got financial advisor or planner who is attuned to the press, wants more press coverage, you've got journalists who want case studies, how do we get the two together? How does the advisor or planner actually, do they get case studies written first of all and then supply them, or how would it work?
I mean, it's good to have that, but I mean, what you don't do is throw, you know, email journalists case studies willy-nilly. I would just email them. I mean, it's not hard to get people's email addresses. You know, you can, whether you phone up, half of the time it's online, and, you know, you can tweet them or whatever, and just tweet them, you know, DM them, whatever, just message them and just say, look, by the way, I see, you know, you're regularly writing investment stories, you know, I'm an IFA in wherever, and, you know, I've got lots of case studies if ever you're looking for one. And that can be a way to just get them, you know, get you onto their radar. So there are lots of very soft touch points. You don't have to be very formal and phone them up, because, to be honest, in this day and age, I think journalists have a bloody panic attack if you phone them up. People can't seem to sort of do phone calls anymore. It's like an instant no. I mean, it's like, oh, it's intrusive, you know. In the woke world in which we live, the phone call is a bit sort of almost latent aggressive. So yeah.
And we talked a lot so far about and focused on the personal finance part. Are there benefits to advisors and planners about being featured in the trade press? You know, New Model Advisor, Money Marketing, FT Advisor.
Yeah, I mean, some IFAs couldn't care less. You know, they don't want, you know, they're not fussed about being in, you know, in FT Advisor, in, you know, whatever, you know, professional advisor. I mean, others value it. It's kind of, you know, I think the majority of IFAs want to get into the consumer media where they're potentially going to get, you know, pick up clients, pick up new business, because that's far more important to them. You know, speaking, you know, to their peers, you know, is less relevant for them. I think it all depends. You know, some IFAs love getting into the IFA media and being a thought leader within their space, and others couldn't care less, you know, about being an FT advisor because it's not really going to generate any potential clients for them. So it's therefore not relevant. You know, they want to be in the consumer media. So I think, you know, generally speaking, most people want to get into the consumer media.
And do you think the consumer media has, the consumer media clearly has more trust and credibility attached to it when it comes to consumers than the trade?
Yeah, but actually, I mean, one thing I missed to say is that actually, you know, and this is the value of getting into the trade media is that all the personal finance media on the national newspapers, all these journalists will read the likes of FT Advisor and, you know, all of these sort of trade titles. They will be monitoring them for stories, because obviously these titles are 100% focused on, you know, things that are related to the IFA. So actually they'll look at these for stories. So the one benefit of being in the trade paper, you know, in the likes of FT Advisor, is that you will get seen by national newspaper journalists too. So that can be a good way to get you onto their radar. So I think that's you know, that's often people think, well, there's no point in me being an FT Advisor because I couldn't care, left couldn't care, you know, much about it at all. But there's a real value in that because the personal finance journalists are reading it.
Dan, I see a comment coming from Scott.
Yeah, so Scott raises a good point. Worth mentioning that trade journalists often move on to mainstream media.
And there's exactly that as well, 100%. And, you know, this is often go for the, young journalists who start off on these trades will often, I mean, so many end up, you know, at the Telegraph. And if you've dealt with them when they're sort of, you know, and you've been really helpful to them, when they move to the Times or the Telegraph, which many of them do, you can be quids in because they'll see you as a, you know, an old contact that's helped them as they were, you know, in the earlier stages of their career. And before long, I mean, Simon Lambert is a good mate of mine at Mail Online. This is Money. He's the editor of that, which is obviously a pretty big sort of personal finance section. I mean, he started, you know, he was a junior there. I mean, and I worked with him for so long, and now he's the editor. You know, it makes life a lot easier. So lots of journalists, 100%. It's a long-term strategy, and it can be a really lucrative one, because you'll see that once these journalists get onto the Telegraph, they will keep going back to the same contacts that helped them when they were on FT Advisor.
Yeah, brilliant. What I would say as well is people don't be afraid to ask any questions. You know, it's like a buffet at a wedding. Somebody's got to be the first one. So just drop those in the Q&A section or the chat function, and I'll just field them as we go along.
Okay. So we talked again about case studies, but I've always sensed that you get the best out of journalists if you're incredibly helpful to them. What are the ways that an advisor or planner can be helpful to a journalist, and therefore get onto that journalist little black book or their Rolodex or whatever they?
Well, like I said, I think case studies are one definite way. Another way is just sometimes, you know, stories are breaking. I mean, IFAs need to be, you know, they need to be thinking about, you know, things that are happening in their business that could constitute a story. And, you know, it could be, I mean, you could have had a shift. A lot of your clients are shifting away from equities into bonds over the past year. I don't know. I mean, whatever you know, there's a bit of a trend that you're noticing that can be of value to a journalist. If you say, well, look, this is quite interesting. I've seen this trend and so sending journalists sort of little sort of feature ideas and story ideas that can get you, get you into their good books again. But again, and also the case studies we've touched upon, they're invaluable. And also any data that you've got or any research that you've done, just showing that you're there and that you're proactive and that you're trying to offer them stories that can, open doors. And even if they don't necessarily come back to you the first time, if you keep doing it, sooner or later they will probably, if the ideas that you're coming up with and stories you're suggesting are good, or it could be that you've just got an interesting client who's done something quite peculiar. I don't know. I mean, it can be so many things, but just suggest it to journalists, email them, message them and say this, and things can happen. So yeah, I think you just need to be on the front foot.
Yeah, I can think of an example of that about 10 years ago. I was sat in an IFA's office when I was marketing manager there. Annuity quote came in from a provider, and it was sat under 9 with profit annuity quotes. So there's 9 with profit annuity quotes. It's like that thick of the pack. Bottom was the annuity quote that the client wanted. And it was clear that the annuity provider were trying to hide this away. Passed that to the FT with the client's permission. And it was featured in the FT personal finance section that weekend.
100%. And being alive to things like that. I had an example again with a mortgage broker a couple of weeks ago. Halifax launched the lowest ever 2-year fixed rate at 0.83% or whatever it was. But he emailed me that and said, look, the Halifax it's going live on Monday. On Friday afternoon, he emailed me and saying that the Halifax is just about to launch the lowest 2-year fixed rate ever. Now, this is mortgages, not financial planning, but it's, more or less the same thing. So, and boom, he was in the FT, he was in the Times, the Telegraph, the Mail, everywhere, because we basically broke the story because he spotted that before the national journalists knew about it. So little things like that, just, you'll be getting sort of information all the time. And if you can spot things that are interesting and flag them up to journalists, you can just suddenly get a phenomenal amount of media coverage. So it's being on, really thinking about all of this data I'm receiving, is there anything newsy there? Is anyone doing something slightly untoward that needs sort of revealing, And
I'm assuming you would, in that circumstance, go to a specific journalist rather than pushing out a press release.
Yeah, I mean, we actually just lobbed a quote out to, we've got a tool, so I just lobbed a thing out saying, just quotes out to the entire personal finance sector, basically, and, all IFA media and everyone. But yeah, you can just go to one specific media outlet. I mean, I tell with that one, journalists are crazy about mortgage rates. So, you can go to a decent title and expect them to write it up. So.
Okay. Dan, a couple of questions.
Yeah, so we've got 2 really good ones in. The first one's from Mark, who asks, is there an example structure of what a case study should look like?
Yeah, you don't need to, case studies, I think a lot of people think they've got to be some lengthy 2-page document. A case study just needs to be really just 2 or 3 paragraphs, just revealing the basics of what's happened here. And that's it, really. You don't need to write some lengthy, sort of 2-page essay about everything. The journalist just wants an overview of what's happened here and why is it interesting. And that's kind of it. And then they will ask you for more questions. So don't worry about spending 2 hours writing up, this gigantic case study, because they're only going to use probably 3 or 4 sentences of that anyway. So really it's encapsulating, crystallizing as succinctly as possible what's happened with this case study and why it's interesting. And that's it. So yeah. And also, if you can, if you've created videos, send of the case study, send those to the journalists too, because they often will embed them. Increasingly journalists love video content, and the likes of the Mail Online, lots of, the Independent, they may well embed that, which could be brilliant. So.
Dan, I've seen another one's coming from Philip.
Brilliant. Yeah. So this next question will have extra meaning to anybody active on Twitter over the last few weeks. So Philip says, can you explain to us why it seems that some journalists seem to have an agenda against IFAs and certain large firms? And I'm looking at the Sunday Times in particular.
Oh, well, yeah. I think journalists, this is like an age. I think there are sadly, a lot of IFAs who are very transparent in their charging and fee structures have been tarnished by others that, I think journalists look at the sort of practices of some financial advisory firms out there and then sort of essentially bracket everyone as being the same. That's sadly and it is. I know there are certain journalists out there who are always knocking IFAs, and I think it's almost part and parcel of, I think journalists feel obliged to sort of knock IFAs for whatever reason. I have no idea why, but I think it's sort of, for whatever reason, it does happen. I think you just need to counteract that with constructive, examples. I've seen Phil saying this a lot. You need to defeat them with examples of you doing good stuff for your clients, and and actually where they are being out of line, just confronting them, but in a constructive way and saying, I disagree. And so I think it's going to carry on. It's not going to stop. Journalists by default are they're almost, looking for a bit of, that's what they thrive on. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. And they do some of them seem to pick targets and then go at them for a while and then move on. But the constant factor is a certain cynicism about the sector, and perhaps even a misunderstanding.
Yeah, exactly. 100% a misunderstanding. And I think a lot of the time, when I was a journalist, I'd done my FPC1 and FPC2, and a lot of these journalists don't really know the sector inside out. They're not, they're sort of jacks of all trade, masters of none, they're not, they do not have the knowledge that you guys do about planning, so for them, I think, they just don't have that depth of knowledge. So I think, to an extent, they see themselves as being credible, providing advice, saying, oh, stick your money in this fund or that fund. And, ultimately, what are they basing it on? What's their, what is their expertise?
And if you, again, we're trying to connect good quality financial planners with journalists. So just talk, Dom, if you would, a bit about newspage and how you're trying to do that through newspage.
Yeah, well, newspage, we just created this platform whereby, the idea for it came from, lockdown one, where, we had a bit of time on our hands. And I just thought, I'm going to create this platform that basically helps small businesses tell their stories, and it doesn't charge them a penny. This is what's happening to my business in the, I've lost everything, or, whatever. But it was just because it was a time of, fascinating stories and all sorts. The shit hit the fan in a big way. So we kind of just did it as a storytelling platform, really. But then what we noticed is that it was incredibly viral, because when you get companies who, you haven't paid you a penny into like the BBC or the Times or the Telegraph, they share it a lot. And there was a real buzz. It created a real buzz. So we thought, this is just quite interesting. And that's where the idea for newspage came from. But I've always had a gripe that the media are dominated by big brands, who can afford to pay PR agencies, tens of thousands of pounds per month. And, if you read Sunday Times Home, it's Knight Frank Savills, the same old estate agents being quoted. Sunday Times Money, you're going to have the same old, IFA firms bit, and it gets right on my tits, to be honest. That's, it really does annoy me. And I know that it annoys other people. Why don't they go and quote an IFA in Luton or a bloody IFA in Manchester? And it's almost like, oh, well, it's not done because. So that's what newspage I've set out to do, is just to create a platform that enables everyone to have a voice and to actually engage with journalists. So it's, the arty-farty phrase I've got for it is like democratizing the media, or, it's all nonsense. But really, it's kind of like, everyone should have the chance to give their views. It's not fair that, if you can afford to spend £5 a month on a PR agency, that you get more coverage than a guy who's doing a great job, or a woman who, but who hasn't got that money and who hasn't got that time to do it in their spare time. So newspage really has been created to level the playing field and give, everyone the chance to sort of be the news, to be in the stories. And so that's what it's about, really. It's kind of democratizing the media. And I've got an established PR agency on the side, so I'm kind of bankrupting myself. And I just hope that the one takes off before the other one collapses, or I'm screwed. So really, I think giving everyone a chance to be in the story, to be in the papers, to be in, be on the BBC, but without having to pay a penny. It just feels sort of right without,
Give us a couple of wins on there. Talk us through a couple of times when you've got newspages help clients, mortgage advisors, financial advisors, financial planners.
We've had companies from newspage is about, it covers every sector. So we've got hairdressers, we've got beauticians, we've got, financial advisors, we've got mortgage brokers, we've got stockbrokers, we've got dentists, we've got doctors, we've got kind of, psychotherapists, and we've got everyone. So the beauty of it is that whenever there are stories breaking all the time, and whenever a story breaks, we've usually got someone who can, who's relevant, an expert in that area, and can comment. So, so we have, we've had news pages on Sky News Live, on the BBC, 1 o'clock news. I mean, we've had news pages in every national newspaper. We've had news pages, I call them news pages, in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Forbes, Reuters, Bloomberg, everywhere. And it hasn't cost them a penny. So it's kind of, it's a great feeling. And what the good thing for us is that these people, they share the arse of it when they get into, if you've not paid a penny and suddenly you're on the BBC, it's like, oh my God. And in turn, you shout about newspage, which is good for us. So that's the kind of value for us, is the sort of the buzz that it creates. But yes, I mean, we've had news pages, you can create a news page on, today, and you could be in the FT tomorrow. That's the beauty of it. And
I want to say thanks, because at the end of this webinar, when we send the recording round, we will put a link out to newspage. And in fact, it's on one of the slides at the end of the webinar. There's a link, and there is a discount code. So I think it's the first 3 months free, isn't it, Dom?
Yeah, so newspage will always be free, because that's the whole point of it. It's like, it can be like LinkedIn, 95% of people on LinkedIn just have the free version. Some people pay for the premium. We have a premium version, which is $9.99 a month. And for that, essentially, when you add, let's say there's a story breaking about inflation, the latest inflation data has come out. That's relevant, because actually inflation impacts savers, investments. Let's say you add a comment which goes to the media, a journalist will edit that comment. A professional journalist will edit that comment and make it as robust as possible before it goes. So that's the value of being a premium user, that you get a journalist editing any comment you upload. And also, when you add stories, if you add a story to news page, if you're a premium user, we will effectively score it for you and say, okay, this is, an 8 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10, or actually you could make this better by doing X. So you get a free review if you're a premium user of your stories, which you can go away and write a story that's stronger. So that's the kind of benefit of the premium service.
That sounds like a huge amount of value for a tiny amount of money.
Yeah, well, it's a volume play, ultimately. Newspage is kind of, we're not, it's about volume. If we can get the numbers, then, Newspage works. So,
and we'll give the link out at the end of this webinar, and the discount code as well. And if anybody misses it, we'll put it in the email with the recording of Dom in this interview, which should go out later on today. Dan, I can see some questions in. So do you want to go work through some of those?
Absolutely. So we've got a few stacking up, which is always good to see. First one is from Paul, who asks, is the press the optimum channel to start with? Is radio or TV, both local and national, useful?
100%. I mean, I think everyone thinks, journalism is the papers, or online. Broadcast journalists are often desperate, if you can, radio stations, we've had so many news pages on radio talking, local radio stations. It's surprisingly easy to get onto your local radio station. Let's say interest rates go up, highly unlikely, we all know that. It's probably not going to go up for like ever, because the whole economy would tank. But, if they did go up, that's a chance to get onto your local radio station. Well, what's the impact of this for savers, for investors, and what does it mean if you're, so all of these things, and what does it mean for mortgage, if you've got a mortgage? So going to your local radio, again, I mean, they're going to have the contact details on their websites, and, emailing them and saying, look, this story is breaking tomorrow, or rates have just gone up. Would you like me to come on and talk about what that means for different categories of people? And suddenly, boom, you can be on your local radio station, which actually can be more valuable for you in terms of leads than if you're on, in the bloody Sunday Times Money. So, I 100% broadcast is brilliant, especially if you're on BBC 1 o'clock news. I mean, it's phenomenal. Everyone's seeing you.
Brilliant. Right. So next question is in from Heather, who says, we have a niche audience, so we're not interested in national press. Do you approach niche publications in the same way?
It's a cunning strategy, sort of Blackadder. So there are certain companies, you might be that, it may be that you specialize in providing planning to dentists or vets, and this can actually be a really quick win. You can go to the veterinary media, and there are 2 or 3 titles. You can go to the dental media and say, look, would you like a sort of, an article, a feature on, how dentists should plan for the future, whether that's, helping to buy their own practice or retirement, and, and it's, the bar can be a lot lower. And what you'll find is that a lot of other IFAs aren't competing for that. So you can actually get into, so if you do, if you have lots of vets on your database, on your client base, and you could go to them and say, look, would you be happy to be a case study? And if you go to a veterinary title and say, look, I've got a case study of a vet that I've helped sort of, raise some money for their, for their business and, plan for their future, you'd be surprised how easy it is, these veterinary titles, because for them, it's a little bit off-piste. So it's a lot easier to get into. So, it could be that you have lots of IT contractors as clients, you can go to certain IT media. So 100%. And what you'll find is there's far less competition there. You're not getting the likes of Hargreaves Lansdown, all the big IFA firms and whatever, just going, they're not targeting these sectors. So it could be that lawyers, one of your specialities, you have lots go to Law Society Gazette, suggest features to them. And they may go, Christ, well, we haven't written about, financial planning for lawyers for 2 years because, and then boom, yeah, we'll take a feature and wallop, you're in a title that's perfectly suited to your client base. So yeah, good question.
Brilliant. Right. So Philip again, who asks, are there PR agencies that could deal with a small one-man band IFA, or is it completely outside our budget?
Yeah, I mean, there are PR, there are PR agencies. If you go to London, you can spend, easily £1,000 a day on a PR agency. There are local PR agencies that, will charge significantly less than that. They're often, you get a lot of sole traders and one-man band PR agencies. So, there are agencies out there that are relatively affordable. It's whether or not they can get you into the media that you want to be in. And also, more importantly, whether or not they understand what the hell you do, because, that's the challenge with financial services. If you've got a PR who doesn't know what an ISA is, or who doesn't understand, the difference in investment, the discount on an investment trust, and that's one of your key areas, then it's no good. So you need to find people who sort of understand what you do and can actually relay what you do. And the contact's key. It all depends on where you want to be. If you're happy to be in your local paper and the local agency has got good contacts with them, 100%, and they're a good value PR agency, try them out. But I would always say, just don't tie into contracts, when you start out with somebody, because, just say, look, a good PR agency will say, look, just work with us, and, it'll be very informal for a few months, and, we won't tie you into a contract. So if they're rubbish, you can get rid.
Yeah, that's really useful. Phil, I know you've generally got a view on PR. What have you got to share?
I think on this specific case, Philip, I think for me, as a small individual, you've got sometimes got a bit of an advantage, and Dom agrees. But if you can get into journalists' inbox direct with a good story, and become that go-to person, actually, it can be quite useful. I found back a few years ago, having that direct contact with journalists and cutting the PR out of the middle.
Yeah, 100%.
You sat in an office, there's opportunities for stories throughout the day, really useful stories. Some of the stuff you mentioned earlier, Dom, some of the stuff I mentioned as well. And just, it's so easy to get the details of journalists now. Seek inspiration from your day-to-day, mail it across to journalists and see what they say. Some of them will bite.
Exactly. Some of them, 100%, some of them will bite. And I think, the soft touch points, like, messaging them, or you can just tweet it. If you just at them, not everyone's going to see it anyway. So you can just at them on Twitter or whatever. And it can be a very sort of unintrusive way of approaching them with story ideas and showing that you're engaged. And so, yeah, 100%. And also a key point is, if you're a small, you're a one-man band or whatever, you can be more outspoken. You can have a lot of these big corporate agencies, they're going to come up with, vanilla comments because they're worried about alienating, and it's all about the brand, whereas, if you work for yourself, you can just say it as it is. And journalists love that. Just, outspoken comment, go for the jugular, boom, you're going to get into the papers more regularly if you say it as it is. You don't sit on fences. You don't have to, tick certain boxes and, so I think 100%, if you can, roll up your sleeves and say it as it is, that's a great way. Journalists love outspoken content.
And that takes me on to another question, actually, Dom. how much does language matter when you're talking to journalists?
Yeah, I mean, I did a video on this, I think, which on LinkedIn. I mean, I said, if you want to get into the Times, I mean, I came up with a hypothetical scenario. You might be saying something like, the comment that you send to the Times would be, the Bank of England has formed a Faustian pact with a QE devil, all that nonsense, because Times readers think they're dead clever. So, literary. So that kind of language can work. Whereas obviously it's not going to run in the Sun or the Mail because, Faustian won't mean much at all to a lot of people and, who read the Sun. So equally, if you're talking like sort of Ian Beale, you're not going to get into the Sunday Times. I mean, if your quotes are littered with slang, so it's kind of, use the language. I mean, I often adapt the language. If a client wants to get into the Daily Express or the Sun, I will use different language to what I would use if they wanted to get into the FT. I would use, more sort of highbrow language. So it's, language is important, and it does determine when you write a comment. If it's very cerebral, there's a big chance it will be picked up by a broadsheet or, a website that, believes it's got a higher sort of a more intellectual readership. So, language does sort of translate into where you end up.
If language is important, what are the other things that mean you get into a journalist good book? What are the 3 top tips that you could give for getting into a journalist good book?
Well, case studies, 100%. That is the best way. Story ideas, love it. Sending, and this, like you say, Phil, is just looking at all these things that are happening. You've got to think, is this news? Actually, this little thing that's happened today, or is this a story? Just ping a journalist and say, look, I thought this was quite interesting today. This happened. So ideas, case studies, and then data and trends. Journalists love data. If you've spotted any new data that's emerged, that's that's interesting. I don't know, inflows into ISAs or whatever. I mean, it's data is it's news. Journalists like data-led stories. So I think case studies, data, and just general ideas, showing them that you're full of ideas and that you really want to help them, write decent, relevant, topical stories. So there, I think the 3 main ones.
On the flip side of that, what really hacks journalists off? What really annoys them and is going to get you put on their naughty step?
Sending them a press release and then phoning them about 10 minutes later going, have you received my press release? That gets, right on their nerves. I mean, and PR agencies do that unbelievably. So give them a day or two. Just, if you're going to send them something, if you send them an email, give them a day or two. I tend to, if they don't reply, I'll forward it on. Then after that, you could call them, but just don't phone them up just moments after you've sent them an email or, because they're just going to go, well, I haven't bloody read it yet, have I? And the other thing you should never do is if they do run a quote with you, phone them up and say, can you give me a link? I mean, that is the quickest way to literally, they're almost going to remove you from the story. It annoys journalists, and a lot of in-house policy these days is not to link or, so they can't link anyway. But, and you often get some SEO people who'll say, oh, well, I'll phone them up and see if they'll link to us. And it really pisses them off. So avoid at all costs.
What about asking for copy approval? That's got to be up there.
That's right up there. I think if it's a very sensitive case study, you've got if there's a case study and it's quite a detailed case study and it's one of your clients, I think you've got a right to say, look, would you mind if I had a look at this before it, because it's my client, they're quite a big client of mine, I need to make sure that this is, you're helping them out. And I think a lot of journalists will say that's absolutely fine in that case, but, other times if it's, 100% don't. It's like a red rag to a bull, basically.
Is there a difference there when you're asking the journalist about the case study? Is there a difference between asking for a fact check and copy approval?
Yeah, I mean, really, you just say, look, I just want to make sure that it's all factually correct. It's not about the sort of how you're writing it. It's really, I just need to make sure that it's correct for my own client relationship. I think that's perfectly understandable. And journalists will often understand that if it's more detailed. Whereas if it's just a comment that, you've had a chat with them on the phone and you say, look, can I read your article before it goes live? They're going to tell you to bugger off. If they phoned you up and you're talking about ISA season and whatever trends and blah, 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 and you say, I'd like to see the quote before it goes live. Yeah, they're going to say, get lost 9 times out of 10.
So in that case, there's going to be a lot of people on this call who will be thinking about compliance right now. They're either network members, they're directly authorised, but compliance will loom large in their lives on a day-to-day basis. How do you manage the competing needs of the advisor, the planner, the journalist, and compliance?
Well, I mean, if in doubt, take it out. I mean, the key thing is never say something that you'd be even slightly uncomfortable with. I mean, that's kind of it, really. You know, I mean, different IFAs have got different degrees of freedom, you know, I'm sure, in terms of what they can say and whether they've got to have it checked. I mean, compliance can be a nightmare, but ultimately it's just common sense. You know, you shouldn't say, if you don't generally believe something, and, you know, don't say it. You know, you've got to be comfortable with what you're saying, because anything you say could end up, you know, in print. So you've just got to, yeah, be very comfortable with what you're saying. Have it all spelt out, you know, on, you know, next to you when you're on the phone to them. So you know exactly what you say, and don't say something if, you know, it's a bit risky, it's a bit out of your comfort zone. Do not say it. That's all we sort of advise, really. Just don't say something if you're not comfortable.
We talked about the type of articles. We talked about how to get in touch with journalists. You've been featured in the FT at the weekend, or the Mail, or the Wall Street Journal, or whatever it is. How do advisors and planners capitalise on that inclusion? Yeah, and one thing you can do, as discussed earlier, is, you know, stick those, even though technically it's a bit naughty, stick the logos on your, you know, your homepage as featured in the Telegraph, the Times. You know, I mean, technically you should, it's kind of probably a breach of copyright, but realistically nobody cares. Probably edit that bit out, Dan, just to protect my
I don't know. You just said anything you do say.
Yeah.
Be used against
but,
you.
You know, look, a lot of people, you know, loads of websites as featured in, you know, even if you just have as featured in the Telegraph, the BBC, the FT, I mean, it looks great. So I think that's the one thing you have to do. Don't get into the PR, you know, getting a bit of coverage is really the start of the journey rather than the end of it. You should be sharing it with your clients. Let's say you do, I mean, I'm sure loads of IFAs do weekly or monthly emails to their clients. Mention it, say, look, oh yes, you know, and in this article in the Times, you know, we were, whoever was featured. I mean, it looks great, you know, it creates credibility. Again, it's, you know, and if it's being read by people who aren't yet clients, again, it's credibility. So I think, you know, add it to your marketing material, you know, tweet it. And this is another thing, you should be engaging with journalists on Twitter, you know, on Twitter regularly, and sort of doing all of this stuff. So 100% use it in all your marketing. I'm sure you recommend this, Phil. I mean, you know, if you're in the FT, tell your client base about it. You know, what you can't do is just send them a PDF of the whole article, because that's a bit naughty, but you can sort of, you know, send them a link to that article, which they can then click on and read themselves. So yeah, wring it dry, really. Absolutely. Email clients, prospects, and professional connections. Yeah. The prospects and the professional connections are probably more important than the clients. But email prospects, clients, professional connections. Try and do it the day that you've been included as well. 100%. Yeah. Push it out on your social channels, not multiple times, because it moves fast. Have a press page on your website if you've got enough coverage. I think 100%. But the logos, you know, if you can have it, you know, I mean, lots of our, you know, clients have like tickers across their website, you know, so you can just click on the link and, you know, and quickly go. So it's brilliant for a new client who's coming to your site for the first time. They can click on the link to the BBC and boom, they're seeing you on the BBC. That's, you know, invaluable. 100%. And I think what we'll do now is, Dan, I can see some questions coming through. So what I'm going to do is just put a couple of parish notices up, if that's okay for everybody. And then we'll dive into attendees' questions. Hopefully that works for everybody. I'm just going to share my screen now, and again, hopefully that will work a treat. Everyone, Dan, can you see the slide?
Yeah, you're in presenter view, so maybe switch that round.
Yeah, no worries. Go.
Yeah, there we go.
Fantastic. So, reminder of the newspage special offer. It's 3 months free. Sounds as though there's a whole load of value there to be had if you're getting people editing your comments and grading your stories. The link is there. The code is there. Scott said actually the code, he's had a problem with the code. So if other people want to try it and just report back if there's a problem, that would be great. And if there is, we'll get that fixed, obviously. But as I say, looks like a whole load of value with excuse me, with what news pages are offering there. If you want to stay in touch with news pages, there's the website, there's their Twitter handle. couple of other things that I'd say before we get to everyone's questions. We talked a lot about client stories and client videos. If anybody is interested on the call about how we create those, we do packages of 3 or 6, and we interview clients, we'll edit the video down. And it's a great way of starting that case study journey. Get in touch with us after this webinar and be very happy to have that conversation with you. And there's our contact details. But as I say, those client stories, great way of showing the value of financial planning and starting off on that case study journey. We'll send an email with a recording and the links, etc. Later on today. And just want to remind you before we get to questions with Dom, our next free webinar is on the 8th of September, 10 a.m. Another special guest, we've got Dave Seeger, former MD of SEPA Professional, who's going to talk about how advisors and planners can generate more profitable, longer lasting relationships with solicitors. Professional connections are really the holy grail of generating new inquiries along with referrals from existing clients, but so few firms do it well. So 8th of September, 10 a.m, Dave Seeger, Q&A, talking about that for an hour. And Dan, if you're gonna put a link in there, the chat, so people can sign up for that, aren't you?
Yeah, that's just been done, so people can click that and get signed up.
Excellent. So parish notice is done. Let's get back to Dom and more questions. Dan, you go for it.
Yeah, so we've got 2 questions in at the moment. First one is from Kay, who asks, does sharing media coverage require an NLA license?
If you're just sharing the link, no. You can share the link, and the NLA can't do as far unless they've changed their rules recently. No, it's absolutely fine. What you can't do is copy and paste the article and use that in an email to your clients. You can say, look, as featured in the Times, hyperlink that, or and then your clients can go and read it. That's absolutely fine. You don't need any permission for that. So.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Final question is from Faisal, who says, are letters pages useful in terms of brand building? And by letters pages, they mean letters in the FT, Economist, Times, generally, rather than just the personal finance sections.
I don't know. I mean, do people read letters pages? I mean, for me, it's kind of like, there are, look, you can get into them. I mean, the Evening Standard, we've had clients in the Evening Standard, I mean, whether or not, how many people read the letters pages, I mean, I think there are far better places to be, you want to be in the, the news stories rather than the letter pages. So for me, it's kind of, yeah, look, if you've got really strong views, if someone's written something and you really disagree with it, yeah, write a letter and send it across. And actually, it can be, often, they can run it. So it's worth doing it, but I wouldn't, I think you'd rather be on page 2 of the Times rather than page 32. So that's my personal feeling. And, a lot of papers in particular receive a lot of people, outraged from, Tunbridge Wells, and, cutting through all the noise can be quite difficult, and you can spend a lot of energy and get nowhere.
Brilliant.
Tom, just on that point, comment sections of articles. Is there any value in advisors and planners posting comments on there, or even reacting to people who have reacted to their comment in the article? Would you just stay clear?
Yeah, I mean, but journalists, I know, I know lots of personal finance journalists, and they're almost like they never read the comments, especially on the Mail Online. They're absolutely terrified of them. I mean, they literally, because the first comment, it doesn't matter what the story is, the first comment is always just someone torpedoing everything about the story. I mean, someone, I don't know where these people, what they're doing in the day, but yeah, I mean, do people, I think, for me personally, I quite enjoy reading some of the comment sections because it's all kicking off. It's more interesting than the story, but, you need to be constructive because you are, at the end of the day, you're a professional financial services company. So you can't be sniping. But if you genuinely feel that you have a view, and put it in there, and sometimes a journalist can actually respond to that, in the comments section. But what you don't want to do is getting all grubby and and just posting all kinds of stuff that's a bit sort of, yeah.
And on the same topic, Saturday morning comes around again. Certain journalists take to Twitter and talk maybe slightly negatively about financial advisors. how should advisors and planners interact with the journalistic?
I would 100%, just engage with them, but be constructive. What you don't do is, start effing and blinding and, all of this. That's exactly what they want you to do. You just need to, if you genuinely believe they're wrong, say why, and just put it out there. So 100%. Why, and like I said, you're the experts, you're the financial planners, you're the people who are doing what you do. Journalists, they haven't done the exams. Half of them have got a cursory understanding of the markets and financial planning, and yet they can have this great audience that they can just speak to. So yeah, if you feel that they've said something that's just not right, confront them about it, but just do it constructively.
Okay, thank you. That's useful. Interesting to see what happens this Saturday morning. Dan,
I'll get involved on. Yeah, I'll be following. Yeah, and see what happens on Saturday morning. So
I've noticed you on Twitter less recently.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's just I know. I used to spend too much time drunk on Twitter, and all kinds of waking up the next morning wondering what the hell you've tweeted. Awful. So yeah, I've cut it out now.
Dan, we got something else in from Scott.
Yes, Scott asks, can we copyright our quotes before use so that we can use them without the licensing issues?
Well, I'm no lawyer, but if your quote, good question. If you send a quote to the FT and they use that, if you're using it in your marketing, I can't see there are going to be any issues whatsoever. It's just you've created that quote. It's only if you quote the article around it that you're in trouble. So, you can use the quote that if you've said something, that's your copyright. It's just what you can't do is just feature the article that surrounds it. So, 100% do what you like. But, I'm no lawyer, but I can't see there would be any issue with that whatsoever.
Fantastic. So Dom, I just want to thank you for the hour you've spent with us. It's been enlightening and hopefully very useful to a lot of people. We will send through a recording of this later on today. We'll put the newspage link in there. We'll make sure that the code works. And as I say, thanks, Dom.
No worries.
And we'll see everybody else on the 8th of September for Dave Seeger. Thanks, everybody.
Brilliant. Take care, everyone. Bye.